We are down now to the last topic under planning, so let's discuss decision making. Lesson 6, Decision Making. When we are discussing the nature of planning, we have discussed that planning is essentially decision making. Decision making, again, is a cardinal part of planning because this is where the planning process involves finding the alternatives and selection of the best alternative. So, to deepen more our understanding, we are going to discuss the decision-making process, the types of decision-making, the decision-making conditions, also the decision-making styles, and the errors and biases in decision-making. First one, let's understand the decision-making process. So, here is the step-by-step process done in making a decision. So, first one, we recognize the problem. And then we decide on the priorities among the problem. The next one is we diagnose and state the actual problem. And then we develop the alternatives in solving the said problem. And then upon developing those alternatives, we evaluate those developed alternatives. And then we select the best alternative among them. And then the best alternative, we're going to implement that. And then for the last step is we evaluate the decision effectiveness, or we evaluate the alternative that we have chosen in order to make the decision. So that's the decision making process. Since this process follows the sequential steps, so a lot of time is spent in this process. This is the case with every decision taken to solve management and administrative problems in business setting. Though the whole process is time consuming because there's a lot of process in it, so the result of such process in a professional organization is magnanimous. So we really need to follow this step in order to make a wise or more appropriate decision for our organization or business. So in our daily lives, so we often make decision, like for example when we wake up, so are we going to eat first or are we going to take a bath? So that's the decision we make. So right now we're going to understand the types of decision making because there are certain types, and what are the differences between these three types. So let's see. So we have rational decision making, bounded rationality, and intuition decision making. So, eto, hindi lang naman sa organization or business or yung mga managers yung gumagawa ng gantong decisions, but also even normal people like us. So, we often make different types of decisions. So, right now, we're going to see so kung ano ba yung decision or decision making na ginawa natin. First, we have rational decision making. So, this is a type of decision making in which choices are logical and consistent, and we maximize the value of it. So, assumptions of rationality. A rational decision maker would be fully objective and logical. So, he will have a clear and specific goal and know all the possible alternatives and consequences. So, in making decisions rationally, it will be consistently leading to deselecting the alternative that maximizes the likelihood of achieving that goal. So the decisions made is in the best interest of the organization. So dito sa rational decision making, we know all the possible alternatives, and the consequences of those alternatives. So, ibig sabihin, alam na natin yung magiging resulta ng mga alternatives na yon. Kaya, magkakaroon tayo ng rational and logical thinking kung ano yung mas appropriate in order to solve the problem or the objective or the goal of the organization. Next, we have bounded rationality. So, um when it comes to being realistic, so this is a more realistic approach rather than the rational decision making, since hindi naman lagi natin alam yung magiging resulta or outcome or the consequences among the possible alternatives. So in bounded rationality, the managers make decisions rationally but are bounded by their ability to process information. So meaning they cannot possibly analyze all information on all alternatives. So the managers satisfy rather than maximize. So example of this is that they accept the solutions that are good enough. So kung sa rational decision making, alam na natin lahat ng possible consequences of among the alternatives. So dito naman, we really don't analyze all the information on all alternatives rather than sa pagma-maximize, so sa rational, we maximize. Dito naman, we satisfy. So, we choose the solutions that are good enough. And then for the last type of decision making, intuition decision making. So, under this decision making, we make decisions on the basis of experience, feelings, and judgment. So it can be cognitive-based, experience-based, value or ethics-based, or subconscious mental processing. So again, dun sa rational, we identify and we clearly make decision based on our logical thinking, and we know the possible alternatives and consequences. And also sa bounded rationality, we really analyze the information on all alternatives, but we don't know all the possible consequences of that. So we make decisions that are good enough. So dito naman sa intuition decision making, we make decisions based on our gut feeling or also based on our experience. Like for example, last year this product was sold largely on the Christmas sale. So doon mo ibe-base yung decision mo for this year's Christmas sale. So, 'di ba, kung kumita nga siya last year, so sa tingin mo kikita din siya this year. So, ganun yung decision making na ginagawa dito sa intuition. Or maybe based on sa feeling mo, like for example, feeling mo kikita yung ganitong product. So, ganun siya. So again, that's the three types of decision making: rational decision making, bounded rationality, and intuition decision making. Next, we have decision-making conditions. So, we have certainty, risk, and uncertainty. So, first one, certainty. So, it is the ideal situation to make decisions. So, the outcome of every alternative is known. So, from the word niya na certain, so, ibig sabihin, yung mga alternatives or outcome of those alternatives is known. Kaya siya certainty. And then, for risk, so this is a situation in which the decision maker is able to estimate the likelihood of certain outcomes. So though there are risks, pero alam mo din yung possible outcomes nung alternatives na pinili mo. But you are not just 100% sure, unlike dun sa certainty. And then for uncertainty, so this is a situation in which a decision maker has neither certainty nor reasonable probability estimates available. So sabihin dito, you're really uncertain of the outcomes that might happen, if pinili mo yung certain alternative na yon. So, yung sa, again, dun sa certainty condition, so it is very ideal and para lang din siyang problem solving. So, the challenge is simply to study the alternatives and choose the best solution. So, for example, problems tend to arise on a regular basis. So, a manager may address them through standard or prepared responses called programmed decisions. So, these solutions are already available from past experiences and are appropriate for the problem at hand. So, yun yung malalaman mo na parang certain ka na dun sa alternative na yon since meron ka na ng previous experiences or that problem is recurring. So, ibig sabihin, nangyayari siya on a regular basis. So, also, a good example is the decision to reorder inventory automatically when the stock falls below a determined level. So, ibig sabihin, meron ka na ding certain level which is kapag bumaba na yung stock mo ng ganon, so you need to reorder inventory. So, yun yung mga decision-making conditions. So, again, we have certainty, risk, and uncertainty. Next, so we need to understand as well the decision-making style. So, we have here linear thinking and non-linear thinking. First one is linear thinking style. So it is characterized by a person's preference for using external data and facts and processing this information through rational, logical thinking to guide decisions and actions. So, specifically, dito sa linear thinking, gumagamit tayo ng external data and facts para mas makapag produce ng logical decisions and actions dun sa kailangan nating i-obtain. While in non-linear thinking style, so it is characterized by a person's preference for using the internal sources of information, so that will be the feeling and intuitions, and processing this information with the internal sights, feelings, and hunches to guide decisions and actions. So, as you can see, yung sa linear thinking, so we make rational and logical thinking, or we use logical thinking in order for us to make decisions and certain actions. And then, dito sa non-linear, so, based siya dun sa feelings natin or sa hunches or sa intuitions. So, yun yung pag-iisip na ginagamit natin in making um, our decisions. So, in making decisions, errors and biases are very usual. So, this is very normal na magkaroon tayo ng mga pagkakamali and biases in making decisions. But we also need to understand this one so that eventually, we limit or hindi na natin magawa tong mga errors and biases na ito. First one is immediate gratification. So, it describes the decision makers who tend to want immediate rewards and to avoid immediate costs. So, ibig sabihin dito, yung individual, yung decision choices that ginagawa nila is yung magpo-provide ng quick payoffs. So, yun yung mas appealing than those that provides payoffs in the future. So, we make certain decisions based on the gratification that we want. So, yun yung isa nating dapat iwasan because hindi naman lahat is makikita mo agad yung resulta ng mabilisan. So, some is makikita mo pa siya in the near future. So, we should make decision rationally, hindi dahil gusto natin agad-agad ng rewards or result na mabilis. Second is anchoring effect. So it describes the situation when decision makers fixate on initial information as a starting point and once then set, fail to adequately adjust for subsequent information. So, dito, yung parang first impressions, ideas, prices, and estimates carry unwanted weight relative to the information received later. Ibig sabihin, kung ano na yung unang information na nalaman mo, is yun na yung ginagamit mo in order to make decision. So, hindi ka na magse-set pa ng mga um, further informations or yung mga subsequent informations about that. So, nakafixate ka na agad dun sa unang parang initial impression mo doon or initial ideas, yun agad yung ginagawa mo. Kaya ka gagawa agad ng decision. So, which is mali yun because we need to understand not only the first or initial information, but also parang from the starting point hanggang sa matapos. So, we need to genuinely understand that. Number three, selective perception bias. So, when decision makers selectively organize and interpret events based on their biased perception, they are using selective perception bias. So, this influences the information they pay attention to. They the problems they identify and the alternatives that they develop. So, ibig sabihin lang dito is yung paggagawa mo ng desisyon or yung pagpo-provide mo ng alternatives para ma-solve yung certain problem is may halo na siyang bias or based on your own perception, ganyan. Kaya siya tinatawag na selective perception bias. So, mali din yon because hindi ka pwedeng maging biased dun sa mga gagawin mong desisyon. So, you really must wait the kung ano ba talaga yung problem and kung ano ba yung alternative na mas makakapagbigay ng magandang solution dun sa problem na yon. Next, we have confirmation bias. So, the decision makers that seek out the information that reaffirms their past choices and discount information that contradict the past judgments is confirmation bias. So, ibig sabihin, these people ignore the critical information that challenges their preconceived ideas. So, dito si decision maker is nagre-reaffirm na lang siya dun sa mga past choices. So, ibig sabihin, so, nyari, since, ito naman yung nangyari noon, so, ito na lang din uli. So, ini-ignore na niya yung mga critical informations na nag-challenge dun sa certain na pinili niya or dun sa certain na idea na binase lang niya dun sa past choices niya. So, ganon. So, kailangan is, kaya nga meron tayong decision-making process is, kailangan natin siya talagang isa-isahin. So, hindi ka lang agad-agad magbe-base dun sa past choices mo. Because maybe, iyon is tugma dun sa previous economy or previous na nangyayari sa mundo. But right now, since, di ba, there's constant change, so, kailangan mong i-reassess yung mga choices na ginagawa mo. Next, we have framing bias. So, the decision makers select and highlight certain aspects of a situation while excluding others. So, by drawing attention to specific aspects of a situation and highlighting them, while at the same time omitting other aspects. So, in decision making, kailangan lahat ng aspects is i-check mo yan. So, hindi ka lang pwedeng stick sa certain aspect lang. So, dapat, if yung kailangan mong pagdesisyonan is involves a lot of aspects. So, kailangan tignan mo din siya lahat. Next is availability bias. So, it causes decision makers to tend to remember events that are the most recent and vivid in their memory. So, the bias distorts their ability to recall events in an objective manner and results in distorted judgments and probability estimates. So, ibig sabihin, dito sa availability, so, yung parang pinaka recently available dun sa memory nila, yun lang yung naaalala nila. So, ang tendency is, yung mga, di na sila nagkakaroon ng objective manner ng pag-analyze. So, parang ibig sabihin, kung ano lang yung pinaka naalala, yun na lang yung pagbabasihan nila ng desisyon. So, that's wrong because in decision making, we really need to be objective and rational in thinking every decision or choices that we make. Number 7, representation bias. So, when decision maker assess the likelihood of an event based on how closely it resembles other events. So, ang ginagawa naman dito sa decision making na to is nagbe-base lang siya dahil parang kamukha siya nitong nangyari na to, which is mali din yon. Kasi kailangan mo talagang i-assess kung ano yung nangyari dun sa event na yon. Hindi naman kasi pwede na, for example, since kamukha nga siya na nangyari before, so, yung pag-identify mo ng problem and pag-make mo ng decision or ng alternatives is ibe-base mo lang din siya dun sa parang nangyari noon. So, dahil iba-iba naman talaga ang nangyayari, so, alam mo yon, kailangan mong i-analyze and i-check lahat ng aspects dahil iba-iba yung mga nangyayari. So, hindi siya pwedeng maging representation of a event before. So, parang ibang assessment dapat yung gawin mo. And pwede naman, magre-relay ka lang dun sa mga kung ano yung mga ginawa mo before, but you still make certain decision-making process dun sa mismong nangyari na yun. Next one is randomness. So, it occurs when decision makers try to create meaning out of random events. So, nagagawa lang siya ng desisyon based sa mga random events. So, parang sobrang random lang. Wala ka naman talagang specific problem. Wala ka naman talagang specific situation. So, kaya siya tinawag na randomness. Next one is sunk cost error. So, decision makers forget that current choices can't correct the past. They incorrectly fixate on past expenditures of time, money, or effort in assessing their choice. So, again, yung ibig sabihin ng sunk cost natin, so it refers to money that has already been spent and which cannot be recovered. So, ibig sabihin dito, parang past is past. So, parang wala ka nang magagawa, nabayaran mo na siya, na-incur mo na siya. So, parang hindi na siya magmamatter. Kaya siya nagiging error kasi yung ibang decision makers is ginagamit pa siya, which is hindi mo naman na siya mababawi, hindi mo na din siya maitatama kasi nagawa mo na. So, you need to exclude these angkos in making decisions. Number 10, self-serving bias. So, decision makers who are quick to take credit for their success and to blame failure on outside factors exhibit this bias. So, nagkakaroon ka ng bias sa paggagawa ng desisyon kasi kapag yung mga success lang, so doon ka lang magki-credit. And then, kapag failure na, so isisisi mo na lang agad siya basta-basta dun sa outside factors. So, mali yon kasi, for example, merong nagkamali or, di ba, sa pag-evaluate mo ng decision, so, kailangan mo maging true to yourself na baka naman hindi lang din kasi outside factors yung nangyari. So, you need that in order also for yourself to improve. So, that's why, tinatawag din siyang self-serving bias. So, kasi, yun nga, lahat lang ng credit gusto mo sa'yo, pero yung failure is inaalis mo agad sa sarili mo. And last one is hindsight bias. So, it is the tendency for decision makers to falsely believe after that outcome is actually known that they could have accurately predicted the outcome of the event. So, ito yung parang magagawa ka lang ng prediction. So, ibig sabihin, parang, sa tingin ko, ganito mangyayari eh. And then, yung, dahil doon, yun, doon ka na magbe-base. Kaya ka kaya ito yung napili mong desisyon. So, which is, mali yun kasi haka-haka mo lang yon or false belief or sa hindi naman talaga parang prediction. So, it is not 100% sure na yun talaga yung mangyayari. 'Di ba? So, you need to follow the steps really in decision making. So again, that's the decision-making errors and biases. So immediate gratification, anchoring effect, selective perception bias, confirmation bias, framing bias, availability bias, representation bias, randomness, sunk cost errors, self-serving bias, and hindsight bias. So always remember that in making decision, we really need to identify first the problem, and then we also need to decide the priorities among that problem, and then we diagnose and really state ano ba talaga yung problem natin dito. And then we need to develop, evaluate alternatives, and then we select the best alternative for our problem. And then we implement that, and then we evaluate yung desisyon na ginawa natin. Also, in order for us to assess if naging tama ba yung parang conclusion or thinking natin. And then, yun, ganun talaga yung tamang paggagawa ng desisyon. So, hindi ka lang agad-agad pwedeng, ito yung problem, ito na agad yung decision ko. So, you really must be rational and logical in decision making. And that's the end of chapter 3, planning. So, again, planning is one of the function of the managers that we really need to understand because it will help in delivering the strategic value that we need in an organization. So hope you really learn something about planning, about the types of planning, about what type of planning is being done for certain different levels in the firm, or what are the types of planning tools and its application, and also how can we really make logical decisions